Okay, so so what I like to do is start with I want to start with a big win for the week. So what's or I guess since we were last together, since you weren't here last week. So any big wins for the past week or so?
Um, Nothing came to mind.
Okay. Did you get
Um,
any interesting make any good contacts at the conference or learn any interesting stuff?
oh yeah, the conference was good. Yeah, it was a 4-day conference, not technical, just um, their stuff. Um, I guess the one of the wins I could think of is I started reading through code at work.
Hmm.
Um, I was troubleshooting um, the production issue, and the code base is massive. So I started tracing down and started um, coming up my own way to trace the flow, like
Hmm.
using different symbols. So maybe towards the end of this session, I'd like to ask you if you have um, any method of tracing through different codes, or maybe some symbols, right, that you use,
Okay.
things like that.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will do that. Um, well, that that sounds like a winner. Um, let's go ahead and get started then. We'll
Mhm.
start here. So we're back to we're still focusing on reading code. Um, although I'll just quickly race up to where we were. We had the three different types of confusion when we're reading code: the lack of knowledge, where uh, we just don't know the syntax of the language; lack of information, where we don't understand a particular what do you call it, way of expressing something in language. Some people have a way with words and other people don't have a way. Um, and finally, there's this here lack of processing power where we're just overwhelmed. And so we went over, how to address the first two with remembering stuff better and practicing remembering. And then this is kind of where we ended with this idea of elaboration. So what elaboration is about is that we don't necessarily remember things exactly as they were. Our memories are usually colored by our life experiences or maybe cultural filters, and details can be altered or even forgotten. What So if you talk to a lawyer, they'll tell you that when somebody's trying to remember something that happened, that they often don't remember something that happened in the heat of the moment. So the idea of elaboration is the notion of thinking about something that you want to remember, and you want to make sure you remember it the proper way so that you know it's stored properly. So like you want to, there's some new concept you're learning, and you want to, like this is a Python comprehensions, or Java lambdas or something like that. You want to make sure you remember it correctly because syntax errors slow you down and that sort of thing. So the first thing you want to consider is any similarities to this this syntax that you're learning. Does it make you think of other similar concepts? And then for each of the concepts you think that are similar, um, consider, okay, why is this, in what way is this similar? Why does it make me think of the other thing? Does it share syntax? Is it used in a similar way? Is it an alternative to one that I already know? And then the next thing you want to do is consider alternatives. What other ways do you know to write code to achieve the same thing? Um, and so you try to create different variations of this code snippet. Or are there other programming languages that have similar concepts? And what would the syntax be for that? And how do they differ from what you're trying to do? Um, and finally, does this concept fit into a certain paradigm or domain or library or framework? How can I classify it, if you will? And so all by you're effectively thinking about what it is you're wanting to remember. All right. So the bottom line is that if you want to remember things properly, you have to practice remembering things properly by thinking about them from various perspectives. Okay. So if you do this, it'll help you to make a lot of links into your long-term memory, and you'll practice the recall from various perspectives. And most of us don't really have the time or the patience to do all that. But honestly, if it's something that you really need to do, this is the most effective way to do it, to make sure that you remember it properly. Fair enough? Okay, so we learned how to improve our ability to read code that we don't understand. What about code that's too complex to figure out? That's the cognitive overload issue. So we have our short-term memory. Hello, there we are. We have our short-term memory, helps us to remember information by sending it to the working memory and associating it with something in the long-term memory. Okay. So our working memory is used for processing stuff. So, and it'll process 2 to 6 things at a time. And if we're trying to think of more things than that at a time, we get cognitive overload. All right. And so there are 3 types of cognitive overload, or well, cognitive load. There's the intrinsic load is just how complex the problem is in and of itself. The extraneous load is what other distractions do to make the problem harder to understand. And the germane load is the work you have to do to move it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. So, for example, let's say you're calculating a least squares algorithm. The intrinsic load is this basic formula to draw the line that we want. The extraneous load would be these intermediate variables that we create and other functions that we need to call and the special syntax that we need to use. And then the germane load is finding a way to filter all that down to the essential parts that we need so I can associate it with a long-term memory and store it there in my brain. All right. So we can look at this code and dig through it and figure out, okay, how at what point am I sensing cognitive overload? It could be that just the fact that we're using one letter variables gives us cognitive overload. It can be pretty offensive there. And or maybe it's just, you got loops inside of loops and it's all just kind of all crammed together. So this sort of thing, just, if you notice what's causing you to have cognitive overload, this can help you to say, okay, this is what I need to do I need to simplify this part. If the variables are are making things hard to understand, then let me look through the code and see if I can figure out how it's being used and give it a more meaningful name. If these loops are confusing, then I can look and try and figure out what they're doing, and then either add documentation or give it a, a method name and put it in a subroutine that makes it easier to understand. Okay, so getting a little ahead of myself. So the way that we can reduce that cognitive load is refactor it. That's what I was just saying. Break it up, remove duplication, or simplify it. Um, and a lot of times, what I find myself doing is if I've got a bunch of function calls, I may just go and inline all that code so that I can read it from top to bottom, rather than have to have all the subroutines that I call. Sometimes it makes it easier to do. And then, when I'm done, I can just undo it and get it back to where it was so that I'm not breaking the code. I can replace unfamiliar language constructs. So say I'm really not good with lambdas or anonymous functions or that sort of thing. Or even like sometimes ternary operators can be simplified into just stick it into an if statement. um, and IntelliJ will go ahead and automatically reformat it into those things if I with a button push, which is really handy. So I do that sometimes when I find code that is hard to understand. And if I find myself doing that, I can add those unfamiliar constructs to flashcards. And we were talking about that last time. The yeah, whatever the flashcard tools to help us remember stuff. Also, we can create dependency graphs. So we can say, okay, so how are these variables used? How are these methods called? There is a tool. There's the book that we mentioned by Felina Hermans, The Programmer's Brain. She has a website called the codereading.club. And on it, she has this tool called annotate.codereading.club. And you can go and give it a URL of a page on GitHub. It has instructions for how to do it. And you can go and highlight stuff and draw arrows and highlight variables and that sort of thing to make the code easier to understand. Frankly, I would rather just print it out and get my highlighters out, but some people like to do it all on the computer, and that's fine. You can also use a state table as you're reading through the code. Um, I like to write it down on paper, which is why I scribbled it out here. And just you write the different variable names, and every pass through the code or every time the value changes, you can go and report its value as you progress through the code. It's important that you don't skip things that you say, okay, yeah, this I understand what it's doing in this area. Well, a lot of times I find myself thinking I know what it's going to do and then being surprised that it doesn't do what I expected it to do. And how do I figure that out? I walk it through the debugger, and it's like, holy cow, how did I get that value? So yeah, we can do that, and of course, we can combine approaches and print out state table and print out your you call it the dependency graph, and there are also tools that you can buy that will go and create dependency graphs of the classes that you're using. Actually, IntelliJ will show dependency graphs to a certain extent. If you select, there's a way to get it to do that. And I know what you're thinking. This is hard. Yes, it is hard. But as you practice, it gets easier, and the techniques, the whole process just becomes a whole lot easier, and you get better at it. And I know the other thing that you're thinking. what about ChatGPT? We're in a whole new world now. We just take this code and give it to ChatGPT, and it'll tell us what the code's all about. And it can give an interpretation, and the interpretation will at least sound right. But unless you really know what's going on, you're not going to be able to tell if it's even close. And a lot of times it's way off. I've done this with code. I tried to see if ChatGPT could generate documentation for a class file that I was working on an open source project. And so I had to go and generate it, and it generated a really nice document. I was like, well, this is really helpful. And then I started to read it, and I thought, well, no, that's not the intent of this function at all. And even the example code that you provide doesn't compile. So yeah, and if I didn't already know what it did, then I'd be tempted to trust what ChatGPT generated. So AI is getting better. I will admit that I'm now able to provide it with snippets of code, say up to I don't know 50, maybe 100 lines at the very most of code, and it'll give a reasonable explanation of what it does. But for now, I would say that it's not really there yet. Um, all that being said, let me see here. I think I closed. Let me go in and reopen the project here. Debugging Java here. So this is the code that that I showed you earlier. And so what I can do, IntelliJ has this new tool called Junie. It's an AI tool that it has built in. And so what I can do is I basically said, please, please. I'm told that asking please often helps for your prompt engineering. So take that for what you will. All right, please explain. I'll do this again so you can see it in action. The functionality of the highlighted code. And so it will go and send that to the large language model, and it'll go and create a plan. Okay, here's what I'm going to do to go and analyze this code and understand it. I'm going to look at this file, identify the algorithm, explain the code in detail, check if there's any issues, and provide an explanation of the purpose and how it works. So it implements Prim's algorithm for finding a minimum spanning tree in a graph. And there's some structural issues with the implementation that need to be addressed. So, okay, very good. And that is correct. So I pulled this off of GitHub a year or so ago, and just so I could have some ugly code to look at and using this example. So anyhow, so ChatGPT is there. Junie is very helpful, but it's only for small sections of code. So yeah, it is still hard to figure out how unfamiliar code works. And that's why you get the big bucks, so you can figure this stuff out. Still, the tools that we can use to do this are your IDE. You got syntax, coloring, indentation. I showed you the plugin that you can use for IntelliJ to show basically the structure of the code. Various plugins that can help us to do stuff. There's the AI plugins, the Junie and the Copilot and that sort of thing can also help us understand stuff. I'm always a big fan of paper and pens and drawing lines. I do that a lot. I'll print out the code and then just start drawing lines and figuring out, because a lot of times I'll get my if statements off. I don't know if that ever happens to you, but when I'm In my legacy code, I'll have 5,000 line methods, and I'll go and try and clean it up, and I'll have my if statements off, and the code will be all messed up, and I'll have to go to that, get it out and line everything up and draw lines. Um, of course, the debugger is super helpful. Stepping through the code, see how the debugger works, and you see the call stacks, the debugger, or even the profiler. You can use a profiler to help get the call stacks and see how what functions and objects are used most often. And then there's always, fall back on your tried and true log files. Print. Okay, I came in here and then I did this, and I came in here and then I did this. So those are all great ways to understand the code. And they can help us understand, that's nice and all, but I usually need to quickly understand a larger system rather than, a couple hundred lines of code. I'd like to hand that to AI and get it to understand, but the thing is, you need to treat, I think we talked about this before, you need to treat AI like a persistent intern. So you can give an intern 20 lines of code and they'll be able to understand it. Give them 100 lines of code. It'll take them a little longer, but they'll probably be able to figure it out. You give them a 5,000 line module, they're going to go away for a week and come back with a not very good answer. And it's just AI will come back quicker with a not very good answer. So let's take a step back and look at how do we understand larger systems of code. So there's two levels of understanding: the text structure knowledge, the keywords, the variable roles, the syntax, and that sort of thing. And that's what we've talked about already. And then there's, come back you, the plan knowledge. That's where we need to understand really what did the original author intend for this code to do. All right. At work, I'll sometimes say, I know what you just said was English, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And this is kind of what we're getting at here. So this is the minimum spanning tree code we looked at before. And think about the process you would go through when you're figuring out how do developers generally go about figuring out how a program works. First, we need to find what Felina Hermans calls a focal point. It's a starting place. It's an entry point to begin looking at the code. It's usually like the top of the method, or if you're using, say, was it Spring, and Spring Boot, things can go all over the place, and you don't really know where things start. You look for the onload function, or we just, like in this case, we just start at the beginning of the function. Or if you've got a log file, it could be where the bug was reported or where things broke. That's where we start. So we find the focal point. We'll start up here at the top. From this focal point, we can build our knowledge. All right, we can set a breakpoint there and start stepping through. We can see what variables are used and how they're used. We'll notice, like how are they initialized? Like you see, we've got these 4 class variables: the key, parent, visited, and these are purple, which in IntelliJ, when you're using the Darcula theme, the purple variables mean that they're defined outside of this object, of this method. They're class variables. So so that means that we're filling this array. So this particular method call has side effects. That's interesting. So these arrays are used as containers, and n is it's not assigned a value. It's a class value that we use as a counter or a size. And so and this I and U and V are used to sort of, as we're looping through the code, they're help us to step through the code. So how they're used could be helpful to understand how this is done. And then we, since we have a better understanding of how things are related and what the flow of our programs are like, um, we're getting, we at this point have a good text structure knowledge of how the code works. And now we need to start working on the plan knowledge. We need to figure out what did the original developer intend here. So we can see these three arrays are used a lot: visited and parented and key and graph. They're all, oh wow. So graph is an external variable there as well. Parent. So all these are used a lot here. Um, and we can see, oops, goodness gracious, don't use the mouse wheel. um, we can see that we have three arrays. The keep doing that. Um, we these loops all start at 0, um, and we can dig deeper into how everything is used here, and what this MST is, what is being built up. And so now that we know that these values are used externally, we can see, okay, so how are these, or I guess they're defined externally, are they used externally, or is this the only place? And maybe there's a reason why they're used externally, and so I need to see the larger object and see, why is it that they're this way. um, and we return this MST value. Well, why isn't that just a global variable as well? So by digging into how things are used and why they're defined that way, we can start to understand, have a better understanding of what the original developer intended. Okay, so the bottom line is that the focal point is key. You have to know where to start. So, if you've got Spring Boot or some other dependency injection type framework, you need to understand the entry points for those frameworks. Um, you might need to split things up and you know and find where these focal points would be. And you probably just need to understand the uh, just how the framework is used. Um, there are certain assumptions that the framework makes. You need to know what those assumptions are so that you can be able to read code that's built in that framework. Um, and so, with this in mind, we go back to our scribbling of lines and circles, and we can use this to uh, help overcome that cognitive load. We can draw lines between, we see, okay, this is the same method and it's called in three different places. We can draw the lines back to it. So we say, okay, we'll use the same colors to sort of uh, be able to keep track of where we're going and how it's used and that sort of thing. So you can see that this is inside this function, and then both of these are inside. So this is a recursive function call. So that's very interesting. Um, so anyhow, um, so we now come to the point of reading code versus reading natural text. I talked about last time about how reading code is harder than reading text, like reading a novel. But if you're working on, say, you're reading a technical journal of some sort, some kind of nonfiction, it turns out that um, reading code and reading a nonfiction book stimulates the same parts of the brain. So when we're trying to figure out the skills that someone uses for reading code, we can use similar measurements for reading nonfiction text. And I'm having trouble remembering stuff today. Um, so it turns out that people who read better tend to write code more easily. So your ability to learn a natural language is a strong indicator of your ability to learn a programming language. So, and a lot of people find this surprising because computer science started as a STEM subject, specifically engineering and mathematics. So most college computer science programs grew out of the math department. But it would in understanding programming languages and that sort of thing, that has just as much place in the languages department. So it's pretty interesting. So, okay, so all this being said, what do we do when we read nonfiction, right? So what, like, if we're reading a book, a nonfiction book or a newspaper, first think of what you would do. You'll scan the text to see if it's worth your time to look at it more deeply. Then you're going to look at, are there any pictures involved that may explain things better. I might start to make notes and summarize things that I'm reading. A lot of times people write in the margins of a book, or I'll usually have a notebook that I read and that I'm writing in as I'm reading some books, so I can keep track of things and quickly go back and reference it. And all of these are strategies that we learned in school for how to study. And by using eye trackers, researchers have found that when people read code, they tend to first scan the code, get an idea of what the program does. First 30% of their time is used to scan about 70% of the code. And that's very similar to how we'll read a newspaper. Novice developers, they tend to read linearly. About 80% of the time, they'll just read from top to bottom, or they can use the debugger and follow the call stack. A lot of experienced developers don't do that as much because they're able to follow the call stack mentally while they're reading the code. Okay, so if you want to learn something new from a book, the most effective way to study it is not to read it from the first page to the last, right? So the first thing you want to do is you figure out, what is it that I want to learn from this book. If I'm just wanting to see what it has to say, sure, go ahead and read it from front to back. But if you're wanting to learn a specific concept from the book, you will want to enter into that book with that intent in mind. You'll read the table of contents, see what parts of the book cover what you're interested in. Then from that, you'll find the chapter headings that are most interesting, and you'll dig into those chapters and read the subsections inside there, subheadings. Or if that doesn't have subheadings, you may read like the first line of the paragraphs in there to see if that has interesting stuff for you. If there's a particular topic that if you have this topic, you have an idea of what chapters and subsections you want to read, you might also go into the index and see if there's other parts of the book that would cover the keywords and the topics that you're interested in. And only then do you start actually digging into each section, each chapter, to read the parts that are relevant to what you're wanting to know. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time reading stuff that isn't going to be helpful, and you may get bored before you get to the section that you're wanting to know. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and if you're wanting to look at unfamiliar code, I didn't update my slide, sorry. First, you need to know what it is you're intending to do. You want to fix a bug, Are you going to add functionality? Are you wanting to learn how the API works? What is your intent here in reading this code? And then you read the file structure, see where your target starting point might be. And then you'll read the class names inside the structure to filter down to, okay, this is probably the areas I want to go. Within those classes, you'll look at the method names and see which methods probably are doing the things that you're interested in. And then you can use the IDE to search through the code to see if where the usages of these methods and functions and variables are, so you can start digging more deeply into it. And at that point, you can start reading the code, and you haven't wasted a whole bunch of time just sort of using the debugger and stepping through and figuring out what, at some point I'll find something interesting. Okay, so in summary, we've got three kinds of confusion: a lack of knowledge, lack of information, lack of processing power. There are various strategies. There's three ways to overcome that confusion. You want to add it to your long-term memory. You want to practice your recall so you can increase your retrieval strength, and you want to use some of these techniques to reduce your cognitive load. You want to read your code like you would the strategies for reading nonfiction, and understand those, and read your code in a similar way. So basically, go read some code. So does this help? Does this answer the questions that you had?
Yeah, it helps. And yeah, I think the framework helps a lot. So this week, as I was reading through the massive code base,
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to that, framework, and okay, what do I need to make better sense of the code I'm reading? And then I was like, okay, I'm not familiar with this syntax or
Right.
this thing, so I use ChatGPT to help me, you know, bridge the knowledge gap, quickly and things like that. So yeah, it's very helpful. But as I was going through the code base, um, probably has more than 5,000, could be 10,000 line of code. So when you're going through that kind of complex system or code base, what's your approach? Because there could be like tens, like a lot of flows, like different flows. So you need to find the focal point, and then
Right.
I don't know. I'm kind of thinking to have my own way of like notation. Like maybe as I was tracing it, maybe when I encounter a method, then I use hashtag or something. Basically, my own way of documenting things. And if
Right.
it's some other like components, I use a different symbol or something. That was my approach. What is yours?
Okay. So again, you have to know why it is you're wanting to,
Mhm.
what is it you're wanting to learn from the code?
Yeah,
Is it
the intention is to understand the whole system.
you want to understand the whole system? All right.
Right.
So is it uh, does it has a user interface, or is it like a backend with an API?
Yeah, backend. It's a Spring integration. So
Okay.
there's queues involved, maybe several dozens. And then there are APIs, backend
Right.
involved,
Okay. So what
and
I
there's
would
bad
do,
jobs involved.
right. So I would go through the like the controller section, see what is the API of this application? What are the functions that the external applications are going to call here? And then try to get an understanding of each API on its own, and see how deep do I need to dig into each API to at each call to, I shouldn't need to go all, read every line of code, but I should be able to say, okay, this function, this API calls this function, which gives me this information, and kind of I'll keep a my my journal, my developer's journal here. I actually use a great big one, but I'll just keep that open, and I'll take notes there. Or sometimes I'll use like OneNote to so I'm on the
Yeah.
key. I'm stepping through here and I'm typing notes there, and I'll just copy method name and paste it over here just so I can keep track of it. Um, so um, and then if I have trouble reading the code, just understanding the high level stuff of what it's trying to do, then I'll go and fire up the debugger and step through and see exactly what's happening. But I generally try to use a debugger just to confirm that I understood it properly when I read it.
Mm.
Is that helpful? Are you wanting more specific notation that I would use? I know that it's helpful to differentiate between what's called domain knowledge and programming knowledge. You know what I mean by that? So
Mhm.
programming knowledge would be like I'm using an array here, or a collection object, or if statements, or that sort of thing, while loop. The domain knowledge would be, okay, this is where I'm keeping uh, my data table. This is where I'm keeping my spreadsheet. Um, you know, or this is the name of the database, or that sort of thing. Something that would make sense to the user as opposed to would make sense to the developer.
Mhm.
So being able to keep those separate is helpful.
Mm. Sometimes those are intertwined. You can't
Oh yeah,
really, I guess you use the programming knowledge to understand the domain knowledge better, right?
right. Well,
And
yeah, they'll always be intermingled, but making sure to keep track of, okay, this is a variable that contains domain information, and this is a programming construct, or a programming variable. This is like a loop. A loop counter is a programming variable.
Mhm.
That's not part of the domain, but I'm looping through the lines in a spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet is my domain data. So that's really, by understanding what pieces are parts of the domain and what parts of the domain they are and how we're using it, that can help us to understand more quickly, you know, what the code is trying to do. What does this method function call do? It's iterating through the spreadsheet looking for some value, or it's going through and running calculations on related values or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess my second purpose is to develop kind of living documents.
Mm-hmm.
First, at the very high level, um, so next time I don't need to go through the code. I just
Right.
look at some connectors, some some critical components, and then be able to understand what it does better.
Right.
Um, so, what would be your approach
So
when
first,
it
I
comes
would add comment lines in there. The
like
uh,
mm,
beacons that we talked about before. I'd add comments saying, okay, this section of code does this section of code does this, and
okay.
then if I have if I'm able to, a lot of times I'm not able to go through and make these kind of changes, but I would go and say, okay, I'm going to turn this into a subroutine and give it a method name that is meaningful. Usually, it will look a lot like the comment that I put in there. And so that way, when I'm reading the code, it reads like a book.
Mhm.
So, you know, connect to the database, read the related data file, iterate through the lines, find the whatever, find the lines in question, print those lines out, or append them together, format them in a proper report, and then generate the report. So whereas usually the code is just written, whatever, 1,000 lines, line by line, very procedural.
Mhm.
We'll want to go and break it up into methods that make it easier to understand.
Mhm.
So, but putting the comments in would be the first thing that I would do, just to because that's the least invasive, the least risky thing to do. The problem is that the comments will probably not be kept updated if that code changes. And so that's why I like to go back and break it up into methods so that if someone goes and changes the functionality, they'll either replace the old method with a new method or, you know, uh, ideally they'll give it an appropriate method name. Well, can't really depend on that either.
Mhm. I see. So I think I researched this before, didn't find anything. But basically, when it comes to Spring integration,
Mhm.
is there any visualization tool out there? Like you can see different channels, different, connectors. Um,
Um,
I'm kind of mapping that as I'm going through the code right
you're
now.
wanting like basically a flow
Yeah, flow.
diagram, right?
Mhm. Right.
I'm sure that there are. I in all candor, I don't of
Mhm.
uh, of any. What you could do is use a profiler,
Mm.
and that will there is a book here, um, and I can't find it right now, and it's called, well, heck, here we go. This book called Troubleshooting Java. Okay,
Mm.
and he's working on a new version of this, which talks about how to use AI to assist with that. But he mentions a number of very interesting tools that you can use to understand code as you're reading through and trying to debug it. And I I've read through it, and I don't remember, but I do know that he's a big fan of the profiler, and
Mm.
sampling for profile. Okay, fast thread, is that it? Yeah, fast thread is a way to help you with deadlocks. That's a thread dump analyzer, and then for the memory issues, he talks about this. What is it called? Visual VM, and that is a very advanced profiler. I would recommend you get the book. He's got the MEAP. If you go to Manning Early Access
Mhm.
Program, if you buy the MEAP version of the book, you get this version for free, at least the ebook version. And so,
Mhm.
so I would recommend that. That would be really helpful in telling you the tools, and he also explains how to go through and use the tools for tracking down bugs, and that's probably the primary reason you're wanting to understand how this works is, there's a bug in there, how do I find it? Or
Mhm.
there's
Right.
I need to add a feature, where do I do that?
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
So I hope that's helpful.
Yep, it does.
Very good. Okay, so um, I'm sorry, did you have any other questions or concerns?
Um, I had one more question, but it's gone now.
Okay.
Um, then,
Well, if
yeah.
it comes back, I am I'm at your service. I wanted to remind you of the my offer to do body doubling. Um,
Mm.
that a lot of times there are, we're working on something that we just have trouble staying focused on, and so I wanted to offer the my presence. It's a lot of times it's helpful to just have somebody sitting there while you're working on it, or I can be
Mhm.
your rubber duck if you need someone to need to walk through code, and or I can help you pair on something so we can go and divine how something works and that sort of thing. I just wanted to offer myself to assist you in that respect so that can help you be more effective.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd love
So
to. Um, what would be your availability?
um, I am available most of the time, um, and I'll just go ahead and email you my link to my calendar again
Calendar? Okay, sure.
so that you can just set up a time and we will meet
Mhm.
then. But
Yeah,
yeah, I want to make sure that I'm there for you, and my goal is to help you to be successful and to develop habits of successful thinking and action.
yes. But I think I recall what I
Okay.
was going to ask. Yeah. So, do you have any plan to take the students go through maybe a project, together or something to basically um, teach us like kind of hands-on, like how would you do in the like utilize all of this knowledge
Sure.
when you're working on the project?
Right. So next time I was going to start talking about practicing TDD, and I was going to work with you
Mm.
to, I don't know if that's a habit that you already have. Um,
No, yeah, I know TDD is good, but we are not using that. So yeah, that would
and
be
is that
good.
something that you're interested in?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
hmm
Then, so yeah,
So
that
we'll,
was my goal for
mhm.
next time is to walk you through the steps for doing TDD. Are you wanting to do an exercise of basically looking through some unfamiliar code and understanding that?
Um, yeah,
Okay. All right.
and
That's a great
so
idea.
not
I had not thought of.
not only that, but I guess the main focus would be um on this design pattern kind of thing, right? Like how do you um gain knowledge of different design patterns? So basically, when you read through some code base, you can understand at the very
Recognize
high
a
level
design pattern.
this is
Yeah.
what kind of pattern um without going through the nitty-gritty things. So I
Right.
think that's you mentioned that at one point. So I was just wondering if you
Right.
have
Okay.
some
Well,
practice.
it's going to be a few weeks before we dig into design patterns, but
Okay.
I will make sure that I have an exercise for doing that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great idea. I appreciate you bringing it up. Um, but so yeah, and next week I will, or I mean, I don't know how much time you have now. Um, I
Yeah, I
have
got
I have, here, let me go ahead and share my screen. Come on, buddy. Yeah, it looks like it's time to reboot. My computer's getting really slow. Um, so I have, there is there's a slide. Is that it? So there's this uh, particularly awful code base that I read about on Reddit. They said this has got to be the ugliest code, ugliest Java code out there, and it is a an Android app that reads Reddit. And so I started digging through to try and understand it and see what makes it so hard to understand. And yeah, I used it for a demonstration of how to determine where you're going to start debugging or going to start refactoring code. Um, and so yeah, I don't have that handy. I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but we'll just stumble through it together. Is that okay?
Yeah. Mhm.
So here's the deal. Um, so I'm doing exactly what I said. I'm going to go through the structure of the code. I'm not I'm not really familiar with it. I know that the code won't be in Gradle or scripts. No, it might be in scripts. I'm assuming these are build scripts. Um, but I'm guessing it would probably be an app. I don't want build. I'm going to look at source. So there's test. I'm not interested in that or debug. So we've got AIDL, Res, and Java. I'm guessing the code's going to be in Java. So that's why I'm looking in there. And then it goes in me cram a Reddit slide. Okay. So the name of the app is obviously Slide. And so these are the top level classes. You got action states, authentication, check install, constants, data share, hidden image flares, post loader, read later, Reddit. That might be interesting. I'm just looking for something that might be used. I'm frankly, I'm not very familiar with Android apps, so I don't know how they're structured. I don't know how they're used. I don't know what the entry point might be. So I'm just gonna kind of guess around. Time utils. That's probably something we'd want to get back. Startup scripts or startup strings. Okay. User tags, vote. Secret contact. Oh gosh, go away. Secret constants. I want to know what the secret constants are. Don't hide them from me. So, okay, so this is basically the API key. Yeah, testing key won't work in this case. So that's what he uses to test his connection. And so that's all that is. Who cares? Um, so just from having looked at this before, I can tell that I've got this project and this main activity is the biggest, ugliest piece of code in the whole program. It's 5,000 lines long. And where would we find that? It would be inside activities, which is the very first. That would make sense. And main activity. So we've got all these other activities, full screen activity. You've got views, websites, base activity. Okay, so there's just two activities. Whatever, main and full screen. Okay, so and then this will be send message, authenticate, post read later. Let's see what we have in main activity. So if we go to, there should be a view, right? Find, delete, and open local history. Is there a, how do we view the structure? There we go. Main activity. Here's all the methods. Get subreddit, async notification badge. So those are all the methods. Just those four. Oh, these are all methods too. On activity result. Oh, these are subclasses. Ah, I gotta know my little icons here. These are subclasses. So it's got a number of subclasses inside this class, or internal classes. Overview, page, adapter, comment. That's fairly complex. Holy cow. No wonder this is such a mess. So over page adapter, and then overview page adapter comment. Yikes. On activity result. So that looks like it do magic stuff. That is important. Actually, mackage stuff, not magic. Got things better. So, all right. Went to the moon. That sounded interesting. Okay, I guess that means it had some sort of bug. On options, items selected, prepare options menu, dispatch key event. So I guess what I was doing is going through here and looking for, you see, okay, it's very deeply indented here. So we can look at this and say, okay, so this is inside of a nested if statement. If this, else this, if this, and we're going to run all this. And this all looks very similar. So it's going to do this, stickied, and this, and this. Is stickied, and this, and this, is ended stickied, and this, and this. So that all seems to be really similar. So what I would probably do, you see he's got some comments here, get the height of the header. That's helpful. I would probably take this and turn that into a method. Get header height.
Mm.
Um, you know, I haven't found a good starting point yet, but I'm just sort of, for lack of a better idea, starting here just because it looks like a good place to start. This is on create. Yeah, it's as good a place to start to any if I don't have any idea where to start. This is an overridden function. So the on create method is evidently, let's see, the main activity is based on base activity. Let's see, what's the base activity? Can't find the declaration to go to. Oh, because I can't get it to compile, that's right. So is base activity in here? Yes, there's base activity. So, and this is extends peak view activity. Is that in here? No, it is not. Peak view activity, I don't know where it would be. If you can't get it to compile, it doesn't help. Project and directory. Well, you're not going to put it in there. Peak view activity. Peak view activity. Import me. That's in base activity. Extends. Okay. Project. Public class peak view activity right there. So this is an activity which is the base for most of slides activity. Support for handling of swiping, setting up the app bar coloring of applicable views. Okay. So that is helpful. That gives me a better understanding of what this is doing. So, and then the main activity, it extends the base activity. which is the base. Okay. Wait a second. Well, what about the peak view activity? Oh, public class peak view activity is right here. And we don't have an explanation of what it does. On create, on pause. So I'm guessing this is a show peak, move peak. So you can peek into some activity, and that's the compat activity. Well, I think I know enough about what this is just by seeing this. It's an activity that's support for handling of swiping and setting up the toolbar and the color of the view. Okay. So I'm back in my main activity. Let's go back to where we were here on the onCreate. So we override the onCreate method, and it has a bundle. You pass in a bundle, which is a saved instance state. Wonder what a bundle is. I'm guessing it's some sort of a special collection. Bundle. Android OS. Okay, so that's part of the Android operating system. So that would be a collection of some sort. I'm sure it's a specific type of object. Okay, save instance state. So we're going to go and pass that to the super objects, or whatever the super classes on create method. And do we do that else? Do anything else with it? We get stuff out of it. Man, this is long. Is this even in the same method? It is. That is scary. No, this is on options item selected. So wait a second. Where were we? We were on create 899, 1073. That's here. So that is. This goes down to 1285. Wow, it's a long method. So if for some reason I needed to know what this method did, this is the way I would approach it. All right. So this bundle is an Android collection class. It's final, which means that I can't go make any changes to it. We check. So setting values, is it in night mode? So that must be a Boolean. It's exciting to see a public Boolean. It's exciting to see it's a class variable. So he's got global variables. Very exciting. Those are always fun. Disable swipe back layout. So we're past the saved instance state, which is a bundle. All right. And from looking at the code down below, that bundle has logged in, a username, and is online flag, among other things. So those are authentication issues or saved instance state. So, okay. So get intent, get flags, and so now since I'm completely unfamiliar with it, what I'll do is just start. Oh, come on. I'll just start reading through. Get flags, flag activities brought to the front and not created. So we just finish. All right. If it hasn't started, then we'll say we've started. Okay, so this is a way, so it's on create, so that makes sense that we're going to start it here. Check the select. Oh, check self permission. Context compath, so that must be a compatibility check. Self permission, write external storage. So we need to make sure we have permission to write to the external storage. Make sure it's not equal to permission granted. So we need to see if we don't have permission to write to any external storage. So if we don't, then that's probably going to keep us from doing stuff. So it says, should show request permission rationale. So if we should show an explanation to the user asynchronously, don't block this thread waiting for user's response. Okay, now we know that it's a thread. After the user sees the explanation, try again and request the permission. Okay, so if it does say permission is granted, then we go ahead and request the permission. And this is evidently what we do. So we say request permissions to write to external storage. All right. So this is an my permissions request read contacts is an app defined inconstant. Callback method gets the result of the request. So this evidently was meaningful in the past. It's probably no longer meaningful because it's not even here. First is false. Okay, so we're going to be checking to see if we've entered in here already. And so we've got a first string. Reddit colors. First start 53, so that's evidently a special color name. Alert dialog wrapper. Set the title. Content settings of move. Not safe for work content is not disabled. You're over the age of 18 to re-enable it. This is what you need to do. Set positive button. Okay. So I don't know what that means, but it's evidently checking for that the user has the proper age. If it's in tutorial mode, then we're going to app restart is null. We set the app restart value. Okay, we're going to save our restart value so that we can come back to this point next time we visit. I would be either putting comments to this effect in or writing this down in my journal, but since you're here, I'm just telling you. I'm thinking out loud. And then put Boolean for start 52 true, apply. Since we've already done the checkup here, evidently we just go in the tutorial, we force the preferences, which is what we've just set here is set a preference, it looks like. Restart, edit, and then we start the activity. And then we've got this else statement, which looks like it's huge. Yeah. So let's just follow this particular path here. It would help a lot if I was able to get this to compile. I've never been able to get it to compile. I've tried it a number of times. So, but we'll start through here. So this is if it's in tutorial mode, we'll go through and we get the instance state. So we get the intent, see if it's exit, then we finish. Otherwise, we're going to apply our color themes, set our content view to an activity overview. We're going to find the view by the ID selected in the toolbar. Set the pop-up theme to have a base theme. Set the support action bar. Okay, so set the toolbar in the screen. I've worked on user interfaces, so I kind of have an idea of what sort of things they're trying to do here. So that gives me a little bit of a leg up. Version SDK intent, version code lollipop. Evidently, lollipop is some SDK. So that would be, yeah, because Android, when they do a release, they give it a different dessert name. At least they used to. And so evidently, if it's greater than lollipop, then we are able to set the status bar color. And so we'll get a darker color. We want to be no even darker than that, than the default color. It's going darker and even darker than the default color. So that's interesting. Um, and then we'll find the sliding tabs and the header. And so if we have a header, then we will get the tree observer. We'll remove the layout listener, global on, remove global on layout listener, or remove on global layout listener. Oh, that's exciting. On global layout. And here's the add on global layout listener. So evidently they changed the name of this at some point. Right. So in Jelly Bean, they changed the name of it from global on layout listener to on global layout listener. So this is something they just had to deal with because Android changed their API.
Hmm.
That makes sense? You see how I'm going through
Yeah.
this?
Hmm.
I can continue if you like.
It's it's very procedural.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Not
that's
a lot of comments.
yeah. No, no. I mean, well, here we've got comments. Inflate the tabs if the single mode is disabled. Yeah, what I would do here is, get the height of the header. That's helpful. I would go and I'd put a comment here of what all of this is. I would have to go through and see what the authentication object is, what the saved instance state is, and so we're setting something in the authentication object. I don't know exactly what that's doing, but I have some idea of what it probably means. So I would probably put a
So,
comment in there.
so Scott, a quick question.
Sure.
So at one point, this idea came to mind. So if you want to understand both, um, like the domain knowledge, and also how the system, how the you know application is working, how
Hmm.
different, let's say, Spring frameworks come
Right.
into play, right? So, do you think it would be a good idea to strip down all the like extra stuff and just focus on start with the key classes and basically you fork your code base and have a minimum version of the application running on your local, and then gradually you add more components, more functions to it. You think that that would be a good
Well,
idea, or
if if your intent is to rewrite it so that you can, refactor it and make it easier to maintain, then that would
right?
be a
Mhm.
way to go. If you're just wanting to understand how it works, what I would probably do is, you know, take like I'd take this method and print it out and, be 15, 20 pages. And I would go through, like in this case, we're working in the Android framework. So we need to separate the Android framework from the domain information. And so in here, you can see the on create is part of the Android framework. Okay. So the on create method is one of the Android structural objects. So we're creating a window or an application or something. Um, and then the setting values is probably an Android object. Um, Slide is our application. So that's probably both Android and a domain object. Okay. Now, this manifest permission, I'd have to dig into it and see whether or not this package manager is probably an Android object. But I don't know if it's an Android object or maybe it's for writing to the database. It could be a database related thing. This setting of the message, this is again Android, but it's also a mixture because it's also content for the domain. So it's a mixture of connecting the Android with the domain. Here we've got Reddit app restart. Okay, so Reddit is the domain. So I now know that this is what I'm wanting to deal with uh, for my application. This is my program. So if I'm wanting to go and for instance, I want to separate it from the framework, I would probably have a function call here that would say set Reddit colors, because that looks like what it's doing here is set Reddit colors, and yeah, we're editing the Reddit colors. And so if it's tutorial, so here we would set the Reddit colors, and if the Reddit colors of this, let's say I would probably go and change this to a method. I would extract this into a method and say um, doesn't contain tutorials. Colors is not equal to no, and it doesn't contain tutorials. So if is tutorial, that sounds good. So now I don't have to go and read that code again, but it's here. So
Mhm.
I would again, I would first go through and put that in as a comment, and next I'd go and start refactoring it like this, so I can make it easier to. And then I would take this and I would say, okay, I'm going to turn this into a method and say, okay, instead of is first, I'll call this um, uh, 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 render as tutorial, right? Although, so this is actually, this isn't is tutorial. What I would need to do is I would go here and I'd say invert the if condition. Boom. So if it's tutorial, then I'm going to do all this stuff. And if it's not tutorial, then I'm going to do this render as now change the name on this, and it won't be as tutorial. It will be as render um, um, general. There we go. And then I would take this here, go turn that into a method and call that, oops, render as tutorial. Okay, so now I've got this part is easier to understand. Now I need to go through here, say, okay, goodness gracious, this is going to take some work and I got to go and figure it out. I'm going to break it up as well. Is this helpful?
Yeah. Hmm.
So, so again, if your goal is to refactor uh, a a project, like for this, I would definitely start refactoring this, and I would start with the ugliest code and start refactoring the nastiest stuff first. Um, and because and I would also refactor the code that is changed the most often, because that's the code that people have to read, and that's probably where most of the bugs are, most of the complexity is. So I would go in there and start refactoring that first. Um, and how would I know where to do that? Well, I would go to Google, and I would say, get find most changed code. Say, okay. So I could do this here. I'll copy that, and I will say, here, where am I? Slide. Say I want to go here. Open in Explorer. Oh, actually, I want to open it in Terminal. That would be better. Open in Terminal. And then I can go here and paste in what I just got. Paste. Ah, okay, so this is PowerShell. I want to do this in Git Bash. Okay, and I'll do this. Paste. There we go. Main activity. So that is the one that I'm looking at. You see, it's got the most changes to it. So that is the code that is most complex, most changed, and should be refactored the most. It also turns out that this is the biggest one in there as well, which is probably why it's changed the most. So this is where I would start refactoring. I would probably go into main activity, into in here, or actually I would say my main activity, and I would go to Git and do show history, and I would see what sort of stuff gets changed the most. And like, holy cow, he made a bunch of changes. He just added all of this code and changed a bunch of stuff here. It looks like he just changed the indentation level there. So, and I would look to see what code seems to be changed the most. There are programs that you can purchase that will help you do that, but you can do a quick eyeball and see what stuff has changed, where things seems to change the most. 500, 1400, there's 1350. You got this 3000, 3400, 500. So 500 seems to be changed a bunch. Rename 500, 700, 800. Add settings 100, 1400. It seems like around 1500 seems to change a lot too. 1800, 2000. Here, 100, 900,
So
2200.
basically, if you don't know where to start, you could use this command line to
Yeah,
identify the most used or changed
right,
classes
right,
and start from there, try to understand those,
right,
right? That would be
right,
a good starting point. Okay.
right. So, like you're saying that you're wanting to understand how this code works and possibly go and clean it up.
Mhm.
You can use that this command here to and again I showed you the search, get find the most changed code,
Yeah,
and it's that's easier to remember than that command, and I I can go and figure it out, but find it, paste it in, it gets me close enough to the solution that I want, and I'm on my way.
right. So
And that's a
when it
good place
comes
to
to
start.
this kind of, sure, when it comes to this kind of like command or different um like tricks, do you maintain a documents of that or
um
like um,
I
like kind of a
have
personal knowledge base or something?
yeah I have basically I have links, and when I'm working on stuff, I've got
Hmm.
I use this, and I have my my developer's journal that I keep keep stuff in. So if I have links, I'll stick it in here so that I can quickly get to it. Here, most changed help on. Okay, so I don't have it. Oh, sorry. That's the wrong search. I need to search notebooks here. Most changed. So how and when to refactor. Okay, so this is a blog post that I wrote. So it's in there. And right. So yeah, I've got it in a blog post, but I think this is just
Mhm.
this is just easy for me to remember to search for it, and I can get to it right away. So I don't have it in a
Got it.
yeah.
Um, do you have some books to recommend where I can learn from like some guidelines for refactoring? Um,
Refactoring.
yeah,
Yes, we will
like
be getting into that, but the your refactoring Java, this is the reference book.
refactoring Java.
This is refactoring by Martin Fowler,
Okay,
and it has a list of inside the front cover. It's got a list of the different refactorings that he teaches you, and he has a list of code smells and the refactorings that are recommended to replace the code smell with. We're going to be going over this in a few weeks,
I see. Yep.
but
Awesome.
this is the book. He has rewritten it for JavaScript.
Okay.
Okay, and um, here there's a guy who's written a workbook that helps you go through. He's got like example code to go and practice doing refactoring. And I was looking to start doing some video courses, sort of walking through how to use the workbook.
Who is the author?
For this, it's William Wake.
I see.
But if you just remember refactoring workbook, it's the one, and it's got the same cover design as the refactoring book.
Okay.
Now, all that being said, where is it? Um, there's another book that, yeah, this right here is one of the most helpful refactoring books that I've read. It's called Five Lines of Code, and he walks you through refactoring a what is it, TypeScript game, but it's
Mm,
particularly helpful. It's a tutorial where he walks you through, um, and I I love this book. Yeah, this is a really terrific book. It's exceptionally well done. And
So when it comes to technical books, I always stuck in the middle or at the first couple of chapters.
right,
So I always have trouble finishing it.
right.
So maybe the way I'm reading is incorrect. So what would you
Could be.
read
This is a
this type of?
reference book. Okay, so this is a book you'll go to when you say, "I've got code that's hard to read," and we'll go over the code smells, and you can say, "Okay, what code smell do I have here?"
Okay,
And it's a large class or a long method. So that's what I had here, right? I had a long method.
I see. Yep.
So I started using extract method because that's the refactoring that he recommends. And I started using extract method to try and simplify things. Replace temp with a query, replace method with a method object, or decompose a condition. So we didn't get to those other refactorings,
Mhm.
but that's what he talks about here. This book is a tutorial that you'll walk through and you learn useful steps along the way. This is one that I bought the paper book so that I could keep it open on my desk as I'm working through the steps on my screen. I found that to be really helpful. You
Mhm.
can also, yeah, you can get the ebook and keep it open on one screen while you're programming on the other screen if you prefer to work that way.
Mhm.
Ebooks are cheaper. and take up less space on the counter. I just know that if I have a paper book and it's on my desk, I will remember to go back to it. I will often forget that I'm reading an ebook and then never get
Right.
back to it. So,
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. Yeah. That's
so
helpful.
my recommendation is that you start with this. You start working through it. He talks about a number of refactorings. Most of them are in here. He's got a few that aren't in here. And then you get this book as a reference to
Mhm.
when you're starting to apply what you learned here to your work. Things aren't going to necessarily fit, and you'll say, okay, how do I do that? This is your reference.
Mhm. Okay.
This is sort of, this is what I had hoped, or this is what I had hoped this would be. This is more a bunch of examples that he walks you through to do refactoring. This is one example that has a whole bunch of different steps that he takes to go and refactor it in a way. And so this feels more like the kind of work that I would do. It's in a
Mhm.
different language, but the concepts map across languages.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess this is a lifelong journey.
Yeah,
Um, so when it comes to that mindset you talked about,
right.
uh, for example, when you go on a extended vacation,
Hmm.
did you do you have any habit like you you just don't forget about this kind of thing and you still squeeze this kind of practice into your daily practice or a ritual or like what's your mindset
When I
like
go
on
on
this?
vacation, I try to
Hmm.
do my best to do something completely different from what I normally would do. This is
Okay.
something I'll do like on the weekend or in the evening. You know, I'll spend like an hour or over lunch. I'll set aside an hour to do this every day so that I'm keeping it fresh in my mind. Remember the
Yeah.
decay of memory.
Mhm.
So by
Yeah.
working through it day after day after day for a month or so, um, spending at least 15 minutes. If I just say, okay, I'm going to give 15 minutes to it every day, and I schedule that time and I do it, then I'll eventually work through it, and I'll learn a lot, and I'll find that it's a lot more fun than I thought.
Mhm.
And so I'll do that in my daily free time. But when I'm on vacation, I want to take a break and let my mind just
Okay.
calm down and wander in other
Mhm.
places. So I come back refreshed and more creative. Another important thing to remember is when I do that and I come back, I don't expect to hit the ground running. I'm going to spend probably a few days getting back up to speed with where I was. So I need to give myself a little grace as far as
Mhm.
coming back from a week of vacation where I just totally didn't do anything.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. This is really helpful.
I'm glad. That's why I'm doing it for you. And we will again we'll revisit this when we get to the refactoring stuff. So just dig into it in more depth.
Mhm. Okay.
Alrighty then. So you got to
Yep.
see me in my natural habitat digging through code that I'm not familiar with. So
Mhm. Yeah,
that's how I work every day.
that's good. Yeah.
Alrighty
So I'll
then.
look out for your email and schedule the hour with you.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thanks,
All right.
Scott.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a good
You have a
evening.
great evening, and we'll talk to you later.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.